And so uh, I don't know if we ever mentioned this. So I don't know how long we're going to be on this whole COVID topic, but there was something that I wanted to bring up that I think you are very vocal about it. But
Yeah,
the the whole COVID-19 and within the LGBTQ community.
yeah.
Yeah, and you were very vocal about it. I think out of the beginning of it, and I only heard about like certain ancillary side stories. I'm not within that community, so I don't know 100% what's going on. But I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about how crazy it is that there's these groups of LGBT community members that are very for much for Trump. They're called
So,
twinks for Trump.
thanks for Trump. Yep.
Yeah, I think it was reported on in LGBTQ Nation or something. I forgot what.
Probably. There's been multiple talks about them, and at the same time, it's like, do we really want to talk about them? Why are we giving them like a platform
Yeah,
to try to spread their stupidity? But can't help it. You know,
yeah.
they're of a certain line of descent.
Uh, Do you have any opinions about that? Because it's something that you were talking about at one point.
So, how I feel about the whole Twinks, it depends on like where we're going with this. Like, I guess I can start off with like my thoughts on Twinks for Trump and
Hmm.
like these LGBTQ people who are very vocal about Trump. Um, and it kind of, for me, like I'm not like I kind of roll my eyes about it because it's just so ridiculous that
Hmm.
you're like part of the LGBTQ community, but you're supporting a guy who actively hates people like us, and his vice president has done like horrific things to like gay people in his own state. Like
Hmm.
I don't try to like rationalize it, but it just made me realize that out of all the identities that we have as human beings, whether or not we're disabled, we're gay, we're Asian, we're like whatever, it made me more seeing stuff like Twinks for Trump and seeing that they're like, I'm just gonna be straightforward about it. They're all white, they're white as hell. Um, it just made me realize that like out of all our intersecting identities, like race will always be at the very top of it because you see women for Trump, you see twinks for Trump. And I mean, to some extent, you do see like other minorities like Asians, blacks, and whatever. But it made me realize that, like within the spectrum of who these people are who are very vocal and supportive for Trump within the LGBTQ community, they're white, cis, gay men. And at the same time, it kind of fits like this whole like it fits this whole demographic that like at the same time like really the only people who are that vocally voting for Trump is like white people at this point. Like I mean there are Asians who are voting for him. That's a completely different like discussion to have.
Hmm.
But it made me realize that when you see like how many white women voted for Trump, even though like represents a lot of he doesn't represent a lot of their interests in terms of feminism, in terms of women's rights and equal pay and all that. You also see a lot of gay white men and women who are voting for Trump as well. And it made me realize that it really just boils down to race. It really boils down to the fact that like he aligns with their racial identity and his white nationalist ideology just fits with what they like.
Hmm.
Whether or not he's anti-gay, anti-women, and like all this other stuff, that doesn't matter to them. The fact of the matter is that he aligns with them racially,
Right.
and his nationalistic tendencies and ideas really resonates with them. So ultimately, we learn from seeing these kind of like fringe groups that are supporting Trump is that for them, it's not about their other identities. The most important identity for them is the fact that they're white.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I think my question that I was trying to align with is the gay community and coronavirus,
Yeah.
and how and it took so long for I think what you were saying, that West Hollywood to close, and I think there was this kind of award ceremony, right, for adult films, for gay adult films that never got canceled and went on with being like an event in West Hollywood or somewhere along those lines.
I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, my thoughts on that. I feel like you have two very different facets of the gay community. You have
Right.
the very superficial, the very like circuit queen, like the kind of the aspect of our community that's really all about partying and like looks and like all that very superficial stuff. You have like that side of the community. Then you have the very activist side of the community. And sometimes they do overlap, you know, like you do have activists who really like to party and like do all those things.
Right.
And you have people who party who care about LGBTQ like activism and stuff. But I feel like there's two very different polar sides of the community. And you have the partying side, which is very like, no, like we want to keep like having like circuit parties and like Songkran and like white party and like all these major events in the gay community. Like they wish that stuff still went on because they just want to party. Like recently, the male escort that was caught with Andrew Gillum from Florida,
Mm.
he attended like a house party in I think New York, along with like a couple other like really high profile like gay entertainers and whatnot. Um, we're all this party in the middle of a lockdown, you know, and they're still trying to like have fun and do their thing. And they posted like he posted like 60 Instagram stories of him at this party. So you have like those people who like don't care about the lockdown, they don't care about the virus, they don't care. They haven't learned anything from the um the AIDS epidemic that happened in like the 70s or like in the 80s. They didn't learn from that, or they just don't care to learn. Then
Mm-hmm.
you have the other half of the community, which are people like me who are very like against these mass parties and gatherings. We are very understanding of the history that went on during the AIDS epidemic, and we're not really that pissed off that like events like Pride and like a lot of like these really big events are being canceled because we realize it's part of the greater good, you know, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter to a lot of us.
Yeah.
So I feel like you have like the side of the community that learned from the AIDS epidemic, and the other half that didn't really learn from the AIDS epidemic, or like the ones that are more interested in the collective greater good, and the ones that are just like, you know what, I'm just gonna do whatever feels good for me, just be hedonistic about it.
Yeah, and my personal thoughts on it kind of comes from this idea. It's like, oh, I survived the AIDS epidemic, I'll survive this. You know, it's like those are two completely different diseases
Well,
that,
at the same time
you
too,
know.
like a lot of the guys who are at these parties, like they're too young to like remember the epidemic anyways, because like that happened in like the 80s, you know, and
Well,
like
that's
a
true.
lot of the people, so a lot of the people who survived the pandemic or like the epidemic um are probably like in their 50s now. Let me
Mm-hmm.
see. I would say like if they're probably like 20 in like 1980, yeah, like they're roughly like 40s and 50s now. But that doesn't mean that like the effects still haven't like trickled down to my generation of the queer community. You know, like we hear stories, like we understand the history of it, and like it's still a big part of our community now. Like we just didn't forget about it. It's just some people choose to like not care
Yeah.
about where we came from. They're more just invested in like the hedonistic side of the queer community, like
Mm-hmm.
Pride and like all these events, but they don't really care about the history and like what's going on before them.
Yeah. Well, that I think just that's just kind of unfortunate, you know,
Yeah.
because if it gets to a point, you know, and I think you mentioned this before, it could get to a point that because these events are not being canceled, because people are not being safe with themselves, then the blame gets passed to another group of people. You know what I mean? Then it starts being called, oh, so because they didn't do what they needed to do, we're gonna call this by something else, and like we're
Well, that's not really the problem
somewhere
because,
else.
well, it's not so much a problem. It's more of like the really racist people are always going to call it what Trump called it,
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't stop other communities from being scapegoated and being blamed for the spread by other people. Especially here in Los Angeles, we really felt that that spread was mainly because of the West Hollywood area, and it really started like the pandemic in LA was really began because a lot of people weren't practicing social distancing. They were still going to events, especially out in West Hollywood, and that really bothered me because I was scared for a while that it would be pinned on my community. Like both of my identities, really. Like I'm gay and Asian. Like, damn, bro. Like I'm like I don't want to be like blamed on both fronts for this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know. It was like I was scared and I was like pretty upset that like they would not only put themselves in danger, put the community at large in general, but
Mm-hmm.
also like they didn't care that like you know people could view this as like, oh, the gays spread it in LA just like they spread AIDS. Like that was the one thing that I was fearing most.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I remember you was very much vocal about your concern on that
yeah,
on Facebook, and I just thought, God, it's like having to deal with this pandemic in such nuanced ways, you know, like it's not just, it's not the Asian thing, and also like we don't either identify as Chinese. Like I'm like 1/4 Chinese, and people just assume I'm like Chinese because I'm just out and about.
yeah.
But you know, just dealing with this pandemic and in those terms is just, I think it just piles on that stress, you know.
Mhm.
Social media right now, just let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, so my Instagram, um, you can find me at Sidereal with an underscore. I think link will be in description. I've always
Yeah.
wanted to say that. Link